Ladies and gentlemen, I'm declaring the results of the election of a Member of Parliament for South Thanet. I, William Alexander, being the returning officer of the above election, do hereby give notice that the number of votes recorded for each candidate at the said election is as follows. Nigel Paul Farage, UKIP, 16,026. Craig McKinley, the Conservative Party candidate, 18,838. The number of ballot papers rejected was as follows, a total of 163. The percentage turnout was 69.85. I do therefore declare that Craig McKinley is duly elected as Member of Parliament for South Thanet constituency.
There's the result from South Thanet, and Nigel Farage, the leader of UKIP, fails to get elected. In fact, he's defeated by a former colleague in UKIP, Craig McKinley, a former deputy leader of UKIP. We'll have a look at the figures just as soon as we have them. But Laura Koonsberg and Andrew Rawnsley are still with me here in the studio. Let's stay on the images for a moment. Laura, your thoughts on that and what it means for UKIP?
Well, it's less tight than they perhaps expected it to be. They have thrown a lot into that campaign. They downsized their ambitions for the rest of the country in order to really focus on Thanet South, because Farage said he would go if he lost it. He said this morning he was a man of his word, so this means by the end of today we will expect not one, not two, but 3 party leaders to have left their jobs.
And cherry on the cake, I think, for David Cameron. Nigel Farage, caused so much trouble for the Conservative Party over the past 5 years. As Laura says, if he gets true to his word, he's going to quit. And love him or loathe him, a lot of UKIP's identity has been bound up with the personality of that one man. And I think in his earlier remarks, before the result was announced, we saw him sort of preparing some consolation when he was talking about, well, the younger people are coming through now. Maybe there was a man who knew what was about to happen. But the truth is, a lot of his party's identity is bound up with him. And underneath that, there's quite a lot of ideological fissures within UKIP as a party. And we'll see who replaces him and how they manage to resolve that.
We'll stay on the images because we expect Mr. Farage to say something in just a moment. He may or may not refer to what his plans are. He may confirm what he said to us in the past. But Laura, from your point of view, now that we know that UKIP have that single seat in this new parliament, let's have a look at the figures. Here we are. The 2,822 majority for the Conservatives there. Pretty healthy turnout of 70%. And the all-important share tells its own story. 38% to the Conservatives, 32% to UKIP and 24% to Labour. I did see quite a few polls during this campaign, Laura, suggesting that Conservatives could be in 3rd place. So, again, it just goes to show how wrong lots of those predictions were.
Indeed, and this seat was very, very closely studied. But we know that some time ago the Conservatives took the decision to station a fairly hefty chunk of campaigning effort a couple of weeks ago in Thanet South. They were keen, they did not want the humiliation of this seat going to UKIP. They did not want Nigel Farage to be in Parliament. They made a decision about that and they piled in their resources, and it made a difference here. It will be now, however, Douglas Carswell, who ends up leading the party, he said this morning he wouldn't rule it out if Farage loses his seat. But there is that real question about, do they really exist as a fighting force without Nigel Farage? Now, the answer to that we won't know for ages. After Alex Salmond left after the referendum, people asked a similar question in different circumstances.
Which they're hoping for, which we've seen across the night and into this morning, of these silver medals they've got in various parts of the country.
2020 strategy.
Second places, which interestingly may, I think, affect the attitudes and the behaviour of the MPs who hold the seats, whether they're Labour or Conservative, because it makes a bit of a difference if suddenly it's UKIP in second place. But I think Laura and I entirely agree. It's whether whoever's, assuming Nigel Farage is going to be as good as his word and resigns, whether whoever succeeds him as leader can have quite a penetration, a cut through the identity he's had with the British public, or at least some of them.
Still just worth taking a breath and remembering the European elections, the last truly UK-wide elections last year, UKIP didn't just do well, they won. That man who's just failed to win a seat that was within his grasp, that he poured lots of intense effort into, was the leader of a party that beat everybody else just 12 months ago.
Let's go back to the declaration there in South Thanet, because I think Mr Farage is about to speak.
The definition of whether you're having a good day or a bad day, and many of you may think I'm having a bad day, but let me tell you, 5 years ago on election day, I was in intensive care after an aeroplane crash, so compared to that, this feels pretty damned good. I do congratulate the Prime Minister. He has secured a Tory majority, something that nobody thought was possible. And there was an earthquake in this election, and it happened north of the border. It happened in Scotland. And I think what you saw were a lot of voters so scared of that Labour SNP coalition that they shifted towards the Conservatives. And that included some of the people here who voted UKIP last time round. But I saw another shift in this election, and I saw UKIP, the party, apparently, for the retired old colonels, suddenly is the party for people under 30, particularly young working women. There is a big change going on in politics. And I think what's really interesting, we've always been here to believe that Britain needs to get back its democracy. We shouldn't be governed from Brussels. But what is interesting is what's happening within our democracy in this country. We've got a party in Britain who got 50% of the vote in one of the regions and nearly 100% of the seats. And we've got another party that scored nearly as many votes, 4 million, as won us the European elections last year, that has finished up with 1 seat in Parliament. And I think the time has come for real, genuine, radical political reform, and it's UKIP that will be the party that leads it. On a personal level, on a professional level, I expressed today a degree of disappointment. On a personal level, I feel an enormous weight has been lifted from my shoulders, and I've never felt happier. Thank you.
Nigel Farage says he's never felt happier, and that's after losing that contest in South Thanet.
And that is the 7th time of asking for Nigel Farage and the 7th time of failing to secure a seat in the House of Commons. The UKIP leader, who friends and foes alike must surely concede has injected more originality, novelty and unexpectedness into this election than any political figure in living memory. But he will not be taking that message and that curious charisma to the House of Commons. Defeated by, in what has already proved to be one of the weirdest elections ever, defeated by a man who I think used to lead UKIP. He certainly used to be a member of UKIP, Craig McKinley, the Conservative candidate. And inevitably, we find ourselves adding a question to the ones already on the list. Do you know what I was about to say? Come here a minute. I was about to say, let's not make this all about Nigel Farage. Let's not just talk about him. But then it suddenly occurred to me that in many ways this general election has been all about Nigel Farage in some ways. This notion of the earthquake that was set to unfold, the People's Army that was due to sweep the nation, the dozens of seats that he was set to secure. None of that has happened, but I'm afraid you cannot write the man off now, as some are doing on my Twitter feed, as the Brian Clough of politics, someone who's never quite arrived in the context of football. I should explain, Brian Clough is widely considered to be the best manager that England never had. Farage is not a failure. He has failed to win in the House of Commons, but if he is to be judged by the message that he peddles and the success he has enjoyed in seeing that message accepted by British people, then arguably he's had an even more successful 5 years than David Cameron has. But he will not be going into the House of Commons, and that should mean that he will not be remaining as the leader of UKIP. That was the promise he made. If you're a UKIP supporter, let's set aside our historical differences and just address the issue of whether or not you do think he should go. It becomes a tension, if you will, between principle and pragmatism. It becomes now a question of whether or not he should fall on his sword for failing personally, but of course he should remain in situ on account of what he has managed to achieve in party terms or politically. Well, characteristically cryptic there, Mr. Farage, that beguiling blend of outspokenness and confusion. Why would he never have felt happier? Surely he would have felt happier if he'd won. To which I suppose he'd answer, well, I didn't, so I've never felt happier. He's right, though. 4 million votes and 1 seat in the House of Commons. It's happened before. SDP, probably the most obvious example of this precedent and this flaw in the first-past-the-post system. And it has to be pointed out. It has to be pointed out that Mr. Farage has blamed everything over the course of the last few weeks for this potentially happening. He's blamed the BBC, he's blamed the media, he's blamed comedians, he's blamed now the electoral system, he's blamed tiredness. But on this occasion, he's right. Now, that isn't fair, is it? 4 million votes and 1 seat in the House of Commons. Theo Usherwood is our political editor. That is obviously a story that is, even on a day of epic events, Theo, that is one that is in a class of its own.
Yes, I mean, the Nigel Farage story, he'd said beforehand that if he didn't get this seat, he'd stand down as leader of the party, and he didn't say whether, he didn't address that question in his speech just then. So, I mean, that's something that we're going to want to hear more from Mr. Farage over the next few hours. Will he stand down? Interestingly, he talked about winning voters from young women. He talked about winning in the north of England, and it was UKIP that cost Ed Balls his seat in Morley and Outwood, because they took 8,000 votes that would have been Labour working class votes in Morley and Outwood, and that let the Tories in the back door in that seat. So it's interesting, where does UKIP go from here? And I was speaking to one UKIP spinner, and this is their line, that they see Farage perhaps standing down and being replaced by a leader a little bit in the same way that Alex Salmond stood down after the referendum, and having a dual alliance, a strong top two running the party, and that would allow Mr. Farage to continue within an influential role within the party, while at the same time allowing somebody else to take the party forward within across the board. And it's interesting that they were saying, the other line that they were saying was that Mr. Farage has a limited appeal. It's around 15% of the vote. He can't go higher than that, and by bringing in a new leader they might be able to reach the 20-25% and have a broader appeal. And it'll be interesting to see what happens next on that, in that regard.
It will be interesting to see whether or not a different leader could break through that percentage figure. But it's also difficult to see how any politician in Britain could ever match Nigel Farage for sort of sheer star quality. I hold no candle for the man, but you have to concede that he's possessed of whatever that pizzazz-based quality is that Ed Miliband hasn't got a gram of.
It's the counter-argument, isn't it, that without Nigel Farage at the head of the party, running the party and being the front man and having all that pizzazz, having all of that showbiz and razzmatazz, that the party simply falls apart. It doesn't have the appeal. You couldn't replace a Nigel Farage phone-in with Suzanne Evans or Paul Knuckle. It simply wouldn't work because they don't have that appeal. Interestingly, though, you talked about vote share there, and something that I picked up on a lot over the course of this campaign, going around the country, speaking to voters, punters, at speeches, and you speak to them and you say to them, are you voting this? Well, actually my vote doesn't count. I'm in a safe seat, I'm in a Tory safe seat, and I want to vote Labour. What's the point? And it'll be interesting to see now whether there is an argument for proportional representation, whereby everybody votes, and then depending on the share of the vote, the seats in the House of Commons are split up. And there's a real case for that, and I felt that over the course of this election, for that kind of system, because of course 150 seats at maximum mattered in this election.
Indeed, you're right, Theo. I'm going to rein you in on the electoral reform debate because, unlike you, I haven't been up all night. I'm still enjoying the debate about events rather more recent. Before you go, of all the people that led major British political parties this morning, how many do you think will be in situ tonight?
2.
Oh, really?
2. I think Nigel Farage will be in situ. David Cameron will be in situ. I don't think Nick Clegg or Ed Miliband will be in situ.
And yet Mr. Farage, the only one who absolutely described the circumstances in which he would step down.
He'll I may be wrong on this, but I think he's going to try and weave it out, play it out a little bit. And again, speaking to his people, there were talk of, he'll step down. He wants the party to beg him to stay. He's desperate for, if they come pleading to him saying, Nigel, don't leave us, stay as leader, then he might just change his mind. He might have a change of heart.
He might just change his mind. Let's have a quick look at my feed. This coming from you. Nigel Farage forgot to resign, says one. Alan says, well said, Nigel. Carl says, I didn't vote for UKIP, but I think Farage should stay as their leader, as they still did well, and it's all down to him, in my opinion. As I've said before, and I will say again, whatever your personal feelings might be about some of the messages peddled by Mr Farage, 4 million British voters in what is supposed to be the mother of all democracies have been rewarded for their votes with a single seat in the House of Commons. Riddle me this. The single most significant political figure of recent years, whether for good or for ill, Nigel Farage, once again at the centre of speculation. Will he stay, or will he do what he promised to do in the event of losing in Thanet South, which, if you're just joining us, he just did, pushed into second place by a huge turnout and a large Tory vote? Will he do what he pledged he would do and go, fall on his sword, resign? What do you think? Well, and yet it's always been thus. It's always been the case that this sort of a clutch of 100 or so seats were the ones in which elections were won and lost. When you see people like the Shadow Chancellor losing his seat, and when you see, cabinet-level ministers for the Liberal Democrats losing their deposits, you realise that any talk of general trends is probably a little premature. But that sense of electoral disengagement is widespread, and it is something that UKIP once again picked up on more effectively than anybody else. The future for Nigel. Ian, what says we're making plans for Nigel? Are we now? Ian's in Guildford. Ian, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Morning.
Hello.
But three things from me. Firstly, I think Nigel Farage has done an absolutely sterling job over this campaign. I mean, I know you're not a fan of his, and nice to hear you calling him by his proper name and not the slant that you usually do. But I think
today is not a day for childish ribbing, Ian. Today is a day for reporting.
No, quite right. And I think even by your own admission, you probably pat him on the back and say good job as well, because he has done really well. And I think if he does stand down, I think the party will be worse off for it, actually. I think he should stay.
But he has to, doesn't he? I mean, the whole line, and I would have said shtick, and I will again tomorrow, but today I won't. Today I will say the whole line, the whole package, whether you buy it or not, you have to agree it's built upon not going back on his word. He is the man that keeps his promises. He's not like other politicians. He said if he loses, he'll walk.
I know, and that's a great shame. Maybe he shouldn't have said that quite as quickly as he did. That is a great shame. Moving on from that, I think obviously Labour have had a bit of a wake up and smell the coffee, thank God. And what I'm really quite intrigued to see now is, I think Ed's brother David, he's working in the States at the moment, isn't he? It'd be really interesting to see if he now moves back to the UK.
I think that soap opera's over.
Do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, he might even be quite heavily involved in Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, and it just in terms of a clean break, in terms of Ed Miliband, I've got to tell you, Ian has just tweeted that he's taking personal responsibility for the loss, which is big of him.
Well.
But the notion of a clean break, the notion of pick yourself up, dust yourself down, and start all over again, returning to the band of brothers narrative, returning to the stab in the back, returning to the we picked the wrong one line. I can't see it A, working, and B, happening.
Well, I'm not sure. Time will tell.
Time will tell.
That's the thing.
Time will tell. Will David Miliband and Nigel Farage be duking it out at the next general election to be the most significant opposition leader? I don't know. I do know that Nick Clegg and Ed Miliband are both expected to resign the leaderships of their respective parties before I bid you farewell at 1 o'clock today. And I've got to tell you, after I bid you farewell today, my work really starts. I'm hosting the election at my daughter's primary school, and that, my friends, has got me quivering in my brogues. Nick's in Ealing. Nick, what would you like to say?
Good morning, how you doing?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Good. Yeah, I think it's been a really interesting election. I mean, I'll let Naomi colours for the mast. I did vote UKIP, I mean, that's not because I'm a immigrant-hating racist, it's because I just didn't agree, with what the left-leaning parties were sort of peddling, really. I mean, I think what Farage has done, I mean, he probably will go, and I think he should go, really, because he's had so much mud thrown at him, but I don't think his place fits anymore. He's almost become like a caricature for ridicule.
Well, you say that, and I know a lot of his supporters feel that, but those of us who've been unpersuaded by him and the lines that he so articulately puts out there, I think, and I'm not going to argue with you about this now, I think he's had an astonishingly easy ride in the media. I can't remember the red carpet being rolled out in this building for a politician in the way that it's being rolled out for Nigel Farage. He writes columns in The Independent, he writes columns in the Daily Express. He got £1.3 million off the owner of the latter. He's constantly in the Daily Telegraph, had his 50th birthday party at the Ritz Hotel, owned by the owners of the Daily Telegraph. I know that the line is that he's the little fella pluckily standing up to the big boys, but I tell you what, mate, if I could get that kind of treatment from the big boys, I could retire tomorrow.
Yeah, agreed. But I certainly think he's brought the party to a point where they can move on. But I just think his face doesn't fit. And I think one thing he has brought to the fore, which I was ignorant to before this election, was that it does need reform, and you can't have 4 million people backing his ideas and his message if they're only going to get one seat in the...
Yeah, but we had a vote, we had a referendum not that long ago on electoral reform, not proportional representation per se, but an alternative vote that would at least aim or aspire to provide a more representative democracy. Let's just remind ourselves briefly, Nick, thank you, of the line that is usually described or usually used to describe first past the post democracies, and that is the least bad option. Can see why Mr. Farage and many of his friends will be rejecting that notion today, but of course it doesn't mean that they are right. Curiouser and curiouser, said Alice. What does Paul in Liverpool say? Paul, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I think if everyone's missed the big picture because it's all London-centred, you see. What matters in politics is the party of protest. In the last election, the party of protest was the Liberal Democrats, and they were left of centre, so they were setting the agenda. UKIP have been the party of protest this time, and they've set the agenda. They've made immigration a big issue. Now, you don't appreciate this in London, but outside of London, immigration is the issue, and Labour Party cannot be trusted on that. There's been a poster on Facebook throughout this campaign of Roger Daltrey saying, "I will never forgive Labour for mass immigration." And that has been a key factor why it's places like Liverpool, the working class vote has gone away from Labour. It's gone to UKIP. UKIP had deprived Labour of millions of votes.
Roger Daltrey out of the who?
Yeah, his poster, he said, "I will never forgive Labour."
No, I understand what the word said. I didn't realise he carried such weight politically in Liverpool.
No, it's just a figure.
Oh, remember the days of Derek Hatton, eh? If only we'd known that really we were all just sitting there waiting for Roger Daltrey to come forward with his views.
Well, we've got to understand that why this election has come and why Labour vote has not held up in the North. It's because they've not faced this issue of immigration. People are still very bitter about that. And UKIP have set the agenda in this election.
Well, they've certainly focused harder on immigration than anybody else. Everybody else did, you're quite right, look like catch-up. But when, Paul, mate, when you break down the numbers, that's not why Labour have lost. Labour have lost because they didn't win seats from the Tories in the South. So UKIP have got a lot of very creditable seconds in the North.
Outside of London.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Because in London, it's a totally different election. This is why the media in London can't get the big picture. That's why they've misunderstood it all. Because outside London, immigration is the issue.
Paul, the media, I hear you, but I will just stress again, UKIP's great performance in the North has not won them a single parliamentary seat, and nor has it denied Labour one. I mean, the big story is Labour failing to win the Conservative seats that it had targeted. And, I mean, arguably, I don't know whereabouts in Liverpool you are, but I've been in London for this entire electoral campaign. I've been in London in the media, in the liberal metropolitan elite for the last 5 years. And, I mean, there are days when I wonder whether we've talked about anything other than immigration in the political context. I think it's been a horrible distraction from some of the issues that people should have been taken into the polling booth. But, hey, who am I to argue with Roger Daltrey?
James O'Brien on LBC.
19 minutes after 11 is the time. A somewhat sedate-looking Nigel Farage is preparing to address the press in Thanet South. He's called a press conference just on the beach there, and we're expecting that to begin in a matter of moments. I can see him on the screen, but he's not actually started talking yet. So rest assured that we will take that. If you're just joining us, I don't know quite whether you've overslept or been sort of in isolation overnight. I should tell you that David Cameron is remaining as Prime Minister with a Conservative majority. You did hear me correctly, after an astonishing night of success for his party. The reason that attention is currently drawn to the Kent coast is because Nigel Farage has lost. And look, I think you have to point out he's already broken his promise to stand down within 10 minutes. So quite whether or not it turns out to be a promise that he keeps within an hour, we'll find out in a matter of moments. Should he stand down? It's odd. Yes, of course he should, because he said he would. And his whole shtick is built on keeping promises. But my God, you'd have to be absolutely devoid of critical faculties to not recognise the scale of UKIP's result across the country. If you listen to this programme on a regular basis, you'll know that I personally have all sorts of reservations about a lot of the stuff that they have come out with and a lot of the people that they have attracted. But there's no earthly way that 12% of the nation, or maybe there is, but I don't personally believe that 12% of the nation are any of the things that the more extreme fringes of the UK Independence Party are accused of being. So how can they only have ended up with one vote? And here he is.
The local elections. We love what you stand for. We agree with you. But we can't afford to have a Labour SNP coalition. So I think some of those older voters who've been voting UKIP for the last couple of years did vote Conservative yesterday, and yet that vote was supplemented, augmented, replaced by a different kind of voter. And the new UKIP voter is predominantly working class, very much younger than it ever was before, and I would characterise our strength in this constituency, and it's being seen all over the country, young working couples, and in particular young women, now voting UKIP. And they're looking for change. They're the kind of people who feel they work hard, do their best, pay for childcare, but are frankly little better off than those that don't work. And that is a big social problem within this country. Personally, I think the first past the post system is bankrupt. It's bankrupt because one party can get 50% of the vote in Scotland and nearly 100% of the seats, and our party can get 4 million votes and just one seat. And I think for those reasons there'll be a lot of angry UKIP people out there, but not giving up on UKIP, but absolutely determined that we get a fairer, more reflective system. But there's something deeper about this first past the post system. What it's led to is a general election in which, because the system that was designed to produce majority government couldn't do it, has led to a totally negative general election campaign. Everybody says, don't vote for these guys, they're slightly worse than us. And my feeling is, if we had a proportional system, actually you'd say, please vote for me, because every single vote counts, and this is what we stand for. So I think electoral reform wouldn't just make our politics fairer, I think it would make it more open, more honest, and we'd see some real debate.
Now, I said, as this campaign went on, that if I didn't win, I would stand down as leader of UKIP. And I know that you in the media are used to party leaders making endless promises that they don't actually keep, but I'm a man of my word. I don't break my word, so I should be writing to the UKIP National Executive in a few minutes, saying that I am standing down as leader of UKIP. I will recommend that pro tem they put in place as acting leader Suzanne Evans, who I think has emerged from this campaign as an absolute tower of strength within UKIP. She works in London, she's based in the London office, and I think that's the right way for us to go. As far as I'm concerned personally, well, yes, there's a bit of me that's disappointed, but there's a bit of me this morning that's happier than I've felt for many, many years. There hasn't been a single life since 1994 that has not been dominated by UKIP. I've tried to mix that with family. I tried for 9 years to mix it with running my own business. And it really has been 7 days a week, totally unrelenting, and occasionally let down by people who perhaps haven't always said and done the right things. So I feel a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I haven't had a fortnight's holiday since October 1993. I intend to take the summer off, enjoy myself a little bit, not do very much politics at all, and there will be a leadership election for the next leader of UKIP in September, and I will consider over the course of this summer whether to put my name forward to do that job again. One thing I'm certain of, one thing I'm absolutely certain of, is there are opportunities coming up electorally. I look at the Welsh Assembly elections next year, the Scottish Parliament the year after, the London Assembly elections. Goodness knows what by-elections may come. And I think those 4 million people out there are pretty loyal. They're voting for us, not because they think we're slightly less worse than somebody else. They're voting for us because they believe in us. And I think the next chapter of UKIP has begun. I want us to reform our membership model. I want to make this a party that you can join for £10 and not £30. I want us to recognise the huge success we've had in this campaign on social media and work even harder on that. And I think you'll see a younger, more vibrant, energetic UKIP campaigning not just to get our country back from Brussels, not just to control immigration sensibly with the Australian-style point system, but one that actually wants to see a fairer society that helps those who are out there working hard and trying their best to have a better life, and an electoral system that actually engages people and gets people thinking that when they vote, they might just get a government and a parliament that is representative of their views. Thank you.
Nigel, this way. Darren first.
So that is Nigel Farage in Margate. What do we make of that, Laura? So he's standing down, but he may stand again.
Well, when is toast not toast? He promised consistently he would go if he didn't get this seat, he would resign from the leadership. Except now we have a sort of Vicky Pollard resignation. I'm going to go off, I'm going to have a summer holiday, and then think about whether or not I'll stand again. Now, I imagine the party membership would be delighted if he wants to basically stay on but have a bit of a rest. But at the same time, isn't that exactly the kind of politicking that he says consistently drives him so nuts about the kinds of messages that we get from other political parties?
I think there are one or two people in UKIP who think actually they might make quite good leaders of UKIP, and that now he's said he's going to go, he really rather ought to stick by it for some of the reasons that Laura just said. It is a kind of slightly odd, I mean, almost kind of beg me to stay. And if you beg me enough, then in that case I might reconsider. And there's always a big chance that they won't beg him, you know.
And Nigel Farage there resigning, and then, well, unresigning really, suggesting that he might actually run for the leadership of the party again come September. I don't think you have to be Nostradamus to predict that he almost certainly will. I hope he keeps his word on the other stuff, though. I hope he really does relax, take some time, spend it with his family, try to get away from the hubbub of politics, because I think he'll live longer as a result, and I'm sure that his family would love to spend a little bit of time with him. Whatever you think of the man, there was one element of what he just said there that was absolutely dripping with honesty, and that was that his commitment to his cause has been as close to complete as it's possible to imagine. But perhaps characteristically, he's having his cake and eating it, isn't he? It's a little bit Putin-esque. I'm resigning, but I might run again in less than 6 months. May, June, July, August, September. Less than 6 months' time. Theo Usherwood is LBC's political editor, so he sort of did, and then he sort of didn't, Theo.
You have to hand it to him, James. You have to hand it to him. Extraordinary. I resign, and then there's going to be a leadership election, and I might run, and then I might run again. I can tell you something. I can guarantee you something. Nick Clegg and Ed Miliband are both expected to resign within the next hour. They will not be saying in their statements there'll be a leadership contest and they'll be running it and they'll be running again. I can guarantee you that. I'll bet my mortgge on it that they won't be making
calm down,
caveats
Theo.
like that.
You've been up all night.
Sleep, I know. But it's interesting also that he did put Suzanne Evans in charge pro tem, as he put it. She did a fantastic job. Well, the UKIP think that she did a fantastic job on the manifesto, and the manifesto was a real banana skin for UKIP going into this election. We know what happened last time around in 2010. Nigel Farage ended up calling it complete drivel, even though he signed the forward to it. So she did a very good job. It was properly costed, and they had it independently verified, and it went down well. So that's why her star has risen so far up, and that's why she's now being put in charge temporarily. If other people put their name forward, you can expect Patrick O'Flynn, Stephen Wolfe, Paul Nuttall, the deputy leader. What
about their MP, Douglas Carswell?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Douglas Carswell will not put his name forward. He's not part of that clique. He's not part of that inner circle around Nigel Farage. The two don't get on. It wouldn't work. And Douglas Carswell is now going to find himself in quite a lonely place as the only UKIP MP in the Houses of Parliament. He's going to probably sit alongside the SNP, and he's going he's going to strike quite a lonely figure because, of course, Mark Reckless lost his seat. Tim Aker over in Thurrock, that was the other banker, or they thought, UKIP thought that was their banker over in Thurrock on the Thames Estuary. They thought they would get that one. It didn't happen. And so it's going to be left to Douglas Carswell to plough his own furrow in the House of Commons, and it's going to be a lonely job.
I'm just going to interrupt you there because we have one of the men of the moment on the other line, the former, the once and future, perhaps, leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage is here. Nigel, good morning. How are you feeling?
Hello. Not too bad. I had the best night's sleep in years. I went to bed at 11:30. I didn't stay up for any of the coverage. I could see yesterday exactly what was happening, that the fear of the SNP had made people revert back to the Conservative Party, and that was happening from Labour voters and from UKIP voters. What I was surprised by when I woke up was that UKIP still got 4 million votes. And to think, last year we got 4.3 million votes and won a national election, and to have got that number of votes under the first past the post system with now an increasing number of younger, 20 to 30-year-olds, particularly women, voting UKIP, I think says a lot for UKIP's future.
You mentioned fear. Nick Clegg, oddly, I don't know if you saw his resignation speech, also spoke of fear and grievance having won the day. Obviously, you're approaching that fear from two very different angles. You think fear of the SNP was entirely justified?
I think fear of a Labour SNP coalition, in which, from what I could see of the personal chemistry, I'm pretty certain which one of them would have worn the trousers. I think that made English voters very nervous indeed.
Well, why?
Because I think the English are feeling already pretty hacked off. That under the Barnett formula, we keep shoveling all this money over Hadrian's Wall, free prescriptions and no tuition fees and all the rest of it.
Do you really think that it comes down to that sort of envy of other people's pocket money?
Not envy. No, that's the wrong word. I think what people are looking for is a sense of fairness. And I also think there's been quite a big rise in the sense of English identity. And that's been happening gradually over the last 20 years or so. So, no, they were scared of that coalition, and that did for Ed Miliband, who, himself did not perform badly, I thought, during the election campaign. I thought the way the Tory press treated him was pretty beastly, frankly.
Well, I'm sure he may have things to say on that subject himself when we finally hear from him, which is, I'm told, imminent. Speaking of fairness, Nigel, just respond to this text I've got here from Abby, who's in Surrey. He says, can someone please advise your newscasters to stop saying that Nigel Farage has resigned as UKIP leader? He has temporarily handed over power to Suzanne Evans so he can have a nice holiday until he returns in September.
Well, I have resigned as UKIP leader. I'm just about to write the letter, actually. And I recommended to the NEC that Suzanne Evans becomes the caretaker manager over the period of the summer. And I'm going to go away for the summer. I haven't had a proper holiday since October 1993. Building up UKIP from nothing.
But you're coming back, aren't you?
Dominating UKIP, as I may have done in the early days, building it up has taken 20 years of my life away. It's been at a massive personal
You're
cost.
coming back, though, aren't you, Nigel?
I don't. Do you know what? I honestly and truthfully cannot answer that question. I want to go away. I want to catch a fish, drink a beer, travel the world a bit, and think about my life.
Well, good luck with the travelling. The likelihood of you not returning during that September leadership election for UKIP, where would you put it?
Your guess is as good as mine.
OK, my guess is 100% certain that you'll be there.
Right at the moment, you know what? Right at the moment, politics is pretty down on my list of priorities.
and I wish you well, and I hope you have a lovely holiday. But do you think it's fair to suggest that when people heard you promise to resign if you didn't win your seat, they probably didn't realise there was even the vaguest chance of it just being a 5-month hiatus?
Look, unlike the others, I keep my promise. I said I would resign if I didn't win the seat. I very nearly did, but I didn't. So I've done the honourable thing. I've resigned, and that must be right.
But it's not a resignation. It's a temporary withdrawal.
Well, that's your prediction. So, if you want to get yourself down to Ladbrokes at lunchtime, you might make some money on it, but you might lose. I'm 51. I've been doing this since I was 29. It's completely dominated every aspect of my life. A lot of it's been fun. I'm proud of the fact that we got Cameron to pledge to a referendum, which he was totally opposed to, and which he will now have to deliver. I'm proud of the fact that we got 4 million votes, and that we're now getting as I said to you earlier, younger voters, engaging in politics who would not otherwise have voted for anybody. And I think I've helped to change political debate. I now need to decide what to do with the rest of my life.
And I hope you make a choice that brings you happiness, Nigel Farage. I truly do, and I think we can both agree that your last comment about you having effected major change to British political debate is inarguable. Nigel Farage there, the once and perhaps future leader of UKIP.
And if young Nigel says he's happy, he must be happy, he must be happy, he must be happy in his world.